We getting ready?
I think so.
So let's see how things are progressing. 25 people think it's a hideous wedge wagon. 7 people think it's an innovative vision, and the same 2 people weren't aware that it was actually a vehicle that drives on streets. So I'm hoping that all of you are. Does anybody need more time to put into the link, or you're all pretty much good with it? Excellent, I appreciate it. Okay, so we'll turn it over to you.
Yes, I have this one. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the core session, Ethics, Can Our Courts Build the Public's Trust and Confidence? My name is Tamara Charles. I am the clerk of the Superior Court in the Virgin Islands. I'm your host this afternoon. And my co-host in the back is Natalie Williams. She'll be handling the live stream because we are live streaming this session. So that's just a reminder. When we get to the questions portion, just remember we are live streaming, so you got to have a mic with you to ask that question. Please use the app to review the full bios of the speakers and to find all the materials that is going to be covered by the speakers. I'm just going to read briefly some introductory information about the speakers. They've already warned me not to go through the full bio, so I'm not doing that. If you are attending the session to satisfy a requirement for the Core Champion program, there's a link in the app for you to fill out that SRT, so you could do that as well. And then at the end, we ask that you also rate the speakers using the app, and hopefully everyone has downloaded the app already. So introduction of the speakers in no particular order. We have Mr. Peter Kiefer, is a career court veteran with over 40 years experience working in the trial courts in Oregon, Arizona, and California. His work has allowed him to go all over the globe. Currently, he hosts the monthly NACOM podcast series, The Court's Leaders Advantage. We also have Judge Susan Sabers, who's the circuit court judge of the Second Circuit of South Dakota. Her career includes a clerkship opportunity for the Honorable C. Arlen Bean of the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals and over 20 years of private law practice before she was appointed to the bench. And we also have Carl Tanis, is the court administrator of the 2nd Judicial Circuit of South Dakota. His career began in Alaska courts in 1988. For the past 5 years, Carl and Peter has been regular columnists on the Ethics in the Court Manager, a national publication for court leaders. So I hand it over to you guys.
Thank you. Before we get to the scenarios, and I know you're all here for the scenarios, I want to go through and tell you about the Core Championship program. This ethics program is in compliance with one of the ethics component to the Core Championship program. Yay! The program has 13 competencies that are divided into 3, count them, 3 modules: vision, principle, and practice. The goals of the Core Championship program are to share with you court management practices and principles, to expose yourself to the core curriculum, and to celebrate your completing various stages of the Core Championship program. There are 5 certificates that are available: Explorer, Principal, Practice, Vision, and Champion. How do you start the core, working on your core, Peter? I'm glad you asked. Simply attend a qualified session like the one that you're in right now, so you've already started. You can also go back and view sessions from previous conferences by going on the NACOM website. Lost my place. After finishing a session, go back and take the structured response test, the SRT, and you're going to be able to find on the app. Can't find the response? Then there we go. then go on to email core@nacomnet.org and receive credit.
Peter, the core champions online say you need to be closer to the mic.
Okay, sorry. Complete all 13 competencies, submit a championship application form, and a short article that could be published in the Court Express or the Court Manager. A group will review your submission and award you the championship program. Along with other core champions, you will be acknowledged in the annual conference. So thank you. I encourage you all to join the Core Champion program, and this is your start. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Carl. Why talk about ethics?
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to do a really quick introduction, but I want to address just a couple things. First thing I'll talk about is mechanics really quickly. As those of you who know, who have watched our sessions before, we do a really interactive, highly discussion-based session. It's not talking heads. We cringe at the idea of talking heads. If I sit in the back of the room during talking head presentations, I think, oh, not that way. And so we hope to do a really interactive presentation. And I know some of us have to be cautious because we're live streamed, but I think we can carefully step around some of the delicate debates and discussions and topics and the scenarios we're going to present today. We will present a scenario. Our veteran actors, our excellent actors will present the scenarios, the dialogue. Then we'll do a polling question to get a sense of the room, to see where our profession is, how we think this through. And then we'll do a discussion about the concerns, the issues that are raised by each one of the scenarios. We're going to do 3 scenarios. So that's mechanics. Let me address content next. We're going to do a scenario on staff selection and what the priorities are in staff selection. We're going to do a scenario on packaging our presentations to funding authorities. What do we present? What statistics do we choose? How do we present our case? How do we make our case? We're going to do a scenario on what is essentially employee relations and grouping employees and feedback from our staff about employee communications, about drawing out their perspectives, which is so important. And so you might think, well, this is really about HR. This is really about messaging strategy. This is really about employee relations and feedback generation. This isn't necessarily ethics. We would contend that it's very much ethics. And that's the lens I would suggest we use when we step through these and when we have our discussions. Packaging our presentations to funding authorities, for example. Yeah, some of it's strategy. Yeah, it's strategic. But it's also honesty. It's also transparency. It's, if we're going to make a case to the public, to funding authorities, to the media sometimes, what do we owe the public? What are our obligations and duties? When we're talking about employee groups and trying to generate feedback and good relationships with employee groups, what do we owe our employees? What's our duty to our employees? What duty do our employees have to the public? All those ethical issues, we would argue that that's the bedrock. That's the lens we should see a lot of this through. So with that introduction, Judge, do you want to, shall I hand the mic over? Do you want to do an intro at all? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, folks. I think lots of us feel as though we either are or work with folks who are overburdened, overworked, underpaid. And the more demands on our time, the more demands on our energy, the more demands on our decision making, I think sometimes we lose sight of ethics. And I don't mean we're acting unethically. I mean, sometimes we forget that ethics is there in every single little decision we make. And we're just intending this as a reminder session that ethics is out there. It can help. It rarely hurts to think about the ethical side of our decisions, and just really as a good reminder session that more overwhelmed we become, ethics is a helpful tool, and that's what it's supposed to be for us. Okay.
Okay. Before we get going, we want to draw your attention to two of the ethical canons in the Model Code of Conduct. The first is avoiding impropriety. A court professional treats litigants, co-workers, and all others with respect and dignity. Interacting with the court, respect, dignity, and courtesy. And the second is Canon 1.4, a court professional respects the personal lives of litigants, applicants, and employees. So with that, yeah, I know. Is there anything we can do about this?
There comes shouts to the house, maybe,
Okay.
Yeah, we'll try to get rid of that little.
Yeah, so at this point in time, we're going to move to the first of the three scenarios. I'm going to call up Courtney, Cadell, Howard, and Courtney, Cadell, and Howard, and Whitney for the first scenario. Mediator or mission first? Okay. You're going to introduce yourself. Yeah.
Anybody want a mic?
There you go. Yeah.
Don't worry, I'm not going to sing. Okay.
So, in this scenario, court executive Kelly Riker and HR director Rudy Baylor, there's Rudy, are down to interviewing the final two candidates of the criminal court manager position in a large metropolitan trial court.
Hello, I'm Kelly Riker, the court executive. The criminal court manager position has been vacant for way too long. I was hoping for a candidate with both strong interpersonal skills and extensive knowledge of criminal court operations. But it looks like we're going to have to go, make a choice.
I'm Rudy Baylor, HR Director. Unfortunately, we did not receive as many applicants that were qualified for this position as we hoped. Therefore, we narrowed it down to two candidates. One candidate is extremely experienced in court management, while the other candidate is extremely experienced with customer service. Marianne Gifford, welcome. Thank you for coming to this interview.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a bit about your skill sets and why you're a good candidate for this job?
Well, I've built my career leading teams, first in retail, most recently as a consultant specializing in organizational development. My focus has always been on fostering collaboration, building trust, motivating employees to perform at their very best.
Thank you. Can you give us a specific example of how you resolved an organizational conflict?
Certainly. As a regional manager at Costco, I supervised over 1,000 employees across a dozen stores. We faced generational tensions among team members. I facilitated meetings to hear all perspectives, fostered dialogue, and helped establish compromises. Although it was challenging, we eventually improved both productivity and morale.
That must have been an enormous challenge. How long did it take you to sort out the issues between generations?
Well, to be honest, corporate was hoping I'd hammer out a resolution before the holidays. Although that didn't happen, I was able to get things under control by June. The important point is I was eventually able to get the generations to agree on some working principles.
Marianne, do you have any experience with trial courts?
Not directly, but I'm confident my leadership experience is highly transferable.
Okay, thank you.
Harvey Hale.
Harvey?
Hello.
Thank you for interviewing with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a bit about your personal skill sets, your professional skills, and why you're qualified for this position?
Well, sure, I appreciate that. I've spent the past decade managing criminal court operations for a suburban trial court. My priority is meeting court performance metrics and project milestones. My leadership style is mission first. I expect commitment. I expect accountability from all of my staff.
Well, Harvey, despite the shirt that you're wearing, what is the most challenging project that you have ever managed?
We implemented a document management system for our case operations. We had a system operational 2 weeks ahead of schedule through teamwork, long work hours, and weekends at the office.
I like all those words.
That sounds great, but how did your employees and your staff respond to such a demanding schedule?
Well, some struggle, but I focus on results. Those who sign with the mission thrive under my leadership. They have to align with my leadership. Those who don't, I encourage them to look for opportunities elsewhere. Ultimately, my court's bench, the judges, they focus on outcomes, not interpersonal challenges.
Excellent, Harvey. Thank you to both of you for your time, and we certainly appreciate your insights and accomplishments. We'll be in touch.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Kelly, interesting candidates. They both provided some skill set, but neither was perfect. I mean, one worked at Costco with no court experience, and the other one, I could see employees quitting with that demanding schedule. Should we reopen the search?
No. And Rudy, I appreciate your thoughts there, but we need permanent leadership now. And judges are expecting stability, and we need that, and we need it now. We've gone too long without it.
This is difficult.
Indeed it is.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Let's see, I'll need a mic back from somebody somewhere. Let's see. How are you? There we go. All right, well, while we get the AV squared away, do you want to go ahead and just talk through the first one then?
Okay, why don't we do that?
Okay. Now, ideally, we would all be able to hire and recruit and attract hybrid employees. Somebody with the focus and the mission focus of Dwight Eisenhower and Mother Teresa at the same time. Somebody like George Patton and Nelson Mandela at the same time. As we all know, we don't get that luxury. We can repost, sure. We can open recruitment again, see who we get the second time around. The second time around, we might get nobody else. Or we might get candidates who are no more of a hybrid than the first panel, and at some point, we've got to fill that position. So, given the choice between mission first or good employee relations and empathy first, what comes first? So should we do you think it'll come up okay then?
What, the survey?
Yeah, if we've got it back up?
Keep your fingers crossed, everybody. If forced to choose, would you hire someone who has task-oriented or with interpersonal skills as a manager? A, someone who has task-oriented to get things done. B, someone with interpersonal skills, sorry for the misspelling, skills to build a team. We've got one.
Wow.
Interpersonal skills is winning out, 24-4. 28.
It's sort of like the Eagles game.
Wow.
6 people thought that somebody who has to be task-oriented to get things done. 5 people, we already have people changing their minds. And we've got 40 folks who are someone with interpersonal skills to build a team.
Wow. So
Judge
if any
Sandberg?
of you are brave enough, any one of the 5, anybody brave enough to explain your rationale, mission first?
I mean, there's a job to be done first. So for me, I'm going to choose the person that's task oriented. To me, having interpersonal skills is a plus, but you need someone that's going to manage the team to keep them on track. So yeah, for me, it's a no-brainer to pick someone that's task oriented.
Okay, and then somebody in the majority, if you're brave enough to make a case for the overwhelming majority.
The reason that I would pick someone with interpersonal skills is because that person is able to tap into every person to get them to do the tasks that we need and want to do it. So they will do it whether they have to work late, come in early, but they want to do the job and they want to do it with excellence and effectiveness.
Well, you recall, though, that the first candidate missed the deadline. So when it comes to performance, she doesn't necessarily have a stellar record.
Well, she might not have been the best person for the job, but there might have been somebody else out there that did have interpersonal skills that could still be task-oriented and get people in on deadline.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but can I ask you one more?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's great. If you're on the operating table and your cardiac surgeon is a really nice guy who makes me feel good,
Right, exactly.
or has a high level of expertise
Right.
and is focused, which one would you go for?
They can't hear him.
Okay, so I probably want the task-oriented guy, but I think I wouldn't have got the guy that was the feel-good because he probably graduated with a C.
Thank you. All right.
What's easier to teach? Is it easier to teach someone how to run the criminal section, how that section appropriately runs? Or is it easier to teach somebody to be decent to other humans? Some people don't get that. Some people you can't teach, and some people just need a little nudge in the right direction and they're fine. Yesterday when we were talking about this, I said to Carl, I'm with the 49, and I think he was stunned because I'm kind of a task manager myself. But I'm like, it really does matter to the public. When the public is looking at us, whether we're fair, whether we're appropriately independent, whether we're getting our jobs done, whether we're doing it on time, a lot of times what matters is whether the person who meets them at the counter is smiling, whether the person that meets them at the counter is decent to them and says, hey, I'm sorry, we can't do that. And the example I used, we had a very angry litigant. Well, we have lots of very angry litigants, but we had a very angry litigant a few years ago who wanted a driver's permit after losing his license because of a third DUI. And he coming back to admin and saying, give me my permit, give me my permit. Well, under South Dakota law, where we hail from, you can't get that driver's permit after your third DUI until you've completed alcohol treatment. And he hadn't. So by statute, not our rule, right? Not the rule we made, but by statute, we could not give him a driver's permit. But he thought it was the judge's fault, and he was seriously angry. And he kept coming back, and people would say, sorry, it's not done yet. Sorry, it's not done yet. Sorry, it's not done yet. And on trip number 4, someone finally said, I'm sorry, you don't actually qualify for a work permit because you haven't completed your alcohol treatment. And the answer, the substance from our gal in the back, knew something about the criminal court process, got the substance of the answer, was substantially less angry when he realized it was actually a failure on his part that he couldn't get the work permit, and it wasn't a lazy judge refusing to sign it. So at some level, we have to have nice people with smiles, and that really matters to the public, because if they're going to leave our building, you know what? Did we take away their driver's license? Did we put their brother in jail? Did we take away their children in an abuse and neglect? We don't do lots of nice things for the people in the public, right? If they're in our building, chances are they don't want to be there. And chances are they're there for a not great reason, right? Very few fun things we're doing in our building. So I really do think that that smile on the face with some personal skills very much matters. Now, is there anybody in the room who has not felt as though they had to pick between personal skills and courtroom skills or knowledge of the court system? Anybody here who thinks this is an unrealistic option? No. Anybody in here who's getting so many applications for their open positions, they're just delighted with the applicant pool every single time? No. So this is real, folks. You're oftentimes forced to choose between these two options, and it's not easy. Not easy. But when we talk about Rule 1.4, it said you have to respect your people and their personal lives. And in the scenario that Peter wrote, this guy, our task manager, has people spending the night at the courthouse, and he comes in 2 weeks early on his project. Well, then why were they sleeping at the courthouse? That's just silliness. You didn't have to have it in 2 weeks too early. So anyways, just things to think of. We do have to respect the people that work for us and the people who come to that front counter asking for help from us.
You know, I have to admit, naturally, sort of by instinct, I'm in that group of 7. And maybe a lot of us are, because when the elevator breaks down, I hear about it. When the key card system doesn't work, I hear about it. And it's got to get fixed. When the prisoner transport elevator doesn't work and you got to get prisoners to the courtroom, I hear about it. I've got to get all that stuff performing well. And so we get, as court managers, we get bombarded with that performance stuff. But here's an interesting observation. You know, from time to time, I'll get feedback from the public. We probably don't get nearly as much as we want, and it's pretty rare. And I also recognize that the people who are mad, kind of like restaurant reviews, the people who have negative stuff to tell us are the ones who are most motivated to tell us. If you walk out and say, oh, that was pretty good, you're less motivated to actually follow up. But here's an observation when I think about which category I myself fall into. I'll get feedback from time to time. This clerk was rude. This clerk was short of patience. This clerk yelled at me. This clerk wouldn't fill out the form for me. I'm confused and nobody helped me. They weren't helpful. So I get, they weren't nice feedback. I don't think I can ever remember any feedback from the public that said, this clerk lacked technical expertise. So I think that despite my natural inclination, I think the judge might be right that if we're talking about meeting the public where they want to be, what they want to see, what our obligations to them are, what their expectations are, yeah, that interpersonal skill really is important. Maybe more so from time to time than making sure the elevator works.
Courtney.
Could it be possible that it's mission specific though, right? Because I think that in some positions, I want that task oriented person, right? But maybe if it's for somebody to work in the criminal department that deals predominantly with the public, then maybe I want that interpersonal nicey person. But if Christy, we're gonna go do our own thing.
You want the mic back, Kristen?
I was just going to say that the question was about managers. And I think we got to be clear that you want your manager to be the task-oriented person and your frontline people to be interpersonal. So there's a difference there. You want your manager to be the person that is making sure everything gets done, but your frontline, you definitely want that person to be interpersonal and have those interpersonal skills because they're the ones dealing with the public more often.
So, and I came in a little bit later, so I guess I'm just looking at this question. I think to myself, why do I have to compromise? Why do I have to pick one over the other? And if it was somebody I was looking to hire as a manager, I do want them to have that strong interpersonal skills because I'm thinking also about my stakeholders and building those relationships. But in addition, you know, most of us, I think, are very short-staffed and having to do a lot. in a day, mandated by statute. So we have to be task oriented, but I think at the same time, managers need to have those interpersonal skills to keep court operations flowing.
I think we've got time for one more comment.
I was just gonna say that the one reason it is hard because you want the perfect person. But if you have this task manager guy and he sounds like he's so kind of rigid and working late at night, is there gonna be any of your staff left to work with him?
And one of the reasons why I asked, should we reopen the search, is I also believe in transferable skill sets. So when I was talking to Marianne, I asked her about a deadline. You know, how long did it take you to resolve it? And she said, well, we were supposed to get it done by the holidays, but I didn't get it done until June. So to me, I was like, well, I can't really transfer your skill sets from Costco over to the courts. And I felt that both candidates were really extreme. I said, should we reopen? And then your response was, no, we had deadlines and other things going on. So that goes back to what you said about training. What can I train you on? If you're missing deadlines, I don't know if I can train you on that.
But I do like the question, why would we compromise? Well, because sometimes we have to, right? Because we had 10 applicants and none of them were what we were looking for. And sure, you can reopen and you can try again, but we're all struggling to fill our positions. Is there anyone in this room that does not have multiple open positions in their clerks and staff offices? Anyone? Okay, let's hear from her. I'd like to hear why she doesn't have open positions. How are you getting it done?
Sorry. We actually go for the interpersonal skills. Prior to our current management and leadership, we had what people would call a very toxic work culture. And since we've hired people who are like decent people, they work well together. They work as a team. They respect what each other's doing and don't, say that person is slacking. It's more about teamwork and working together than not. And so they're happier to stay there.
And you're keeping them.
Yeah.
You're keeping them.
Yeah.
Much of what we do in our courtrooms all day long, every day, and in our court administrative offices, when we do a screw up, we mess up something badly, almost always we can fix it with a piece of paper, right? I can sign a new document. We can file a new piece of paper. We can fix things, but it's hard to fix things. People are miserable coming to work because their boss said, you can either spend the night here to come in ahead of schedule on this project, or you can go look elsewhere. Boy, I'm not going to keep people. I'm not going to keep the people I want to keep if my task manager is running that rough a road.
Okay. So I think we'll call up Roger Rand for the second scenario. You got one? Here you go. So now I'm going to ask data analyst Jack Ross to step forward and join scenario number 2. Court Executive Kelly Riker is preparing to appear before the state legislature's Ways and Means Committee to defend the effectiveness of drug court and to advocate for a dramatic expansion. Determined to make a compelling case, Kelly turns to her favorite data analyst.
So first to all of you, I am Jack Ross. I am a data analyst, and I believe that data must show an honest, complete, and thorough picture. It needs to answer the questions being asked, and only then can decision makers like Kelly make a thoughtful decision. Kelly, so what kind of metrics are you thinking of?
Well, thinking off the top of my head, number of participants, graduation rates, recidivism reduction, cost savings compared to incarceration, numbers like that. We need hard data to show why drug court deserves more financial support.
Okay, those are solid points, but they only tell part of the story. If we focus just on positive numbers, we risk glossing over the nuances of the program.
Jack, the legislature doesn't care about nuance. They care about results. If we don't deliver a clear win, they won't give us funding.
I get that, but transparency matters. The drug problem in the metro area is huge, 3,000 arrests last year. Drug court only handles 300 cases a year. Even tripling that number only reaches a third of those impacted. The program's high success rate is based in part on strict selection criteria: no dealers, no violent offenders, and no third chances. We're already working with a cherry-picked group of participants. As for recidivism, we only track participants for a year after graduation. We don't see arrests after 18 months because we don't track that far out.
Jack, I feel like you're not getting it. That might all be true, but it's way too risky. Mentioning the percentage of participants relative to the overall drug program, or overall drug problem, our selective omissions or limited recidivism tracking makes us look small and ineffective.
Well, I might suggest that maybe legislatures might appreciate a well-rounded picture and know that we're making gradual progress. Being honest about our challenges shows we're committed to real solutions.
Let's try this again. The legislature isn't interested in a well-rounded picture, okay? They want reasons to choose us over every other agency asking for money. My job is to give them those reasons. Your job, Jack, is to give me what I need to do my job.
Wow. That's a very cynical view of government. Do you ever make a decision based on reasoned analysis?
Jackie Jack. I'll also need visuals, okay? And charts, graphs, maybe a catchy slogan, maybe something lighty and up there. Legislators love colors. How about this? Drug court, a lifeline worth every dollar.
I think I'm going to be sick.
Thanks, Jack. I always appreciate your insights.
Thank you. All right, time for the next polling question then, assuming the AV works. You want to give it a try, Peter? All right, I include even negative data to create a complete picture. If we're talking about ethics, we're talking about honesty and openness and transparency. Or B, I don't include negative data, but I'm prepared to respond if it's brought up. Those are the two choices this time. Yeah, I have to say, this voting and the AV, as you can tell, it's a little technically clunky, but this is so cool. I mean, this is why we put up with the technical clunky stuff, because if trying to get a sense of what our profession thinks, what our mindset is, where we're inclined, that is really cool.
Mm-hmm. So 35 say they would include negative data to create a complete picture. 17 says I would not, but I'm prepared to respond to it if it is brought up. Okay. Discussion questions?
All right. Anybody want to give a rationale for how they package their proposals?
Well, since I'm with CCPIO, what I'd say is you need a comms person in on that because that will help you frame the negative information in a positive way that helps tell your story. For example, the drug problem is 3,000 people, we're getting to 300. That's a good point to make with the legislature. Look, we're only addressing of the problem. If you give us more money, we can help more people. So, like I said, even the negative data, if you properly frame it, can be useful in that kind of presentation.
You know, my wife happens to be a lawyer, and when she and I discussed this one, her rule as an attorney is when you're making an appellate court argument, you don't duck questions that are potentially damaging to the position, and you confront them head on, because you would rather confront them head on than have the other side do it and rip your argument to shreds. Well, that's fine and all, but when we're putting together proposals, we make choices about what we include and what we don't. For example, let's talk about drug court, treatment court. I'll give you one where some of us may have made, in working up proposals, may have made choices like this. So in the comparing the cost of incarceration to treatment, there are cost considerations that we can include or not include. Okay, if you send somebody to the pen and they had kids, then the state's going to have to take custody, and there's all that cost of foster kids. If you send somebody to the pen, they are not going to have a job, and they're not going to make money, and they're not going to pay taxes, so there's that public cost. Now, how much were they going to make in that job if they stay out of the pen? Well, I don't know. What if they don't have kids at all, or how many kids do they have, or do you use average number of kids for the entire population? How do you come to those cost-saving figures? So we all make choices. And you know, I remember at the National Center, I did a session on data collection and research methods. And we talked about things like nuance. You have to try to address nuance, but and somebody stood up in the room and said, joint appropriations doesn't want to hear about nuance. And it's stuff that we know, like time to disposition in family cases. When is a family case disposed? They fight about who pays the diapers when the kid is 6 months old, and they fight about who pays for college 18 years later. So when you're talking about time to disposition in family court cases, we all know that's a really squirrely thing to measure. And I know there are standards. I know there have been really good attempts to address that. But we know what the nuances are. We know what the choices are. We know what the data selections are. When we talk about transparencies, how much do we deliver? How much do we talk about? How much transparency do we load in there to the point it just fogs our case? And so it's a really good topic. Anybody want to talk about packaging proposals, rationale?
How about somebody in the minority that said they're not going to address the negative until or unless it's brought up? Someone willing to speak to that? I don't love the word transparency. Don't get me wrong. I love the issue. I love the concept. I think the more transparent we are, the better we act as courts. But I think the word is overused and silly. Can we be entirely transparent? Of course not. We can't tell them everything. Let's say you've got a judge running your drug court problem and nobody likes her. Do you have to tell the legislature that? Of course you don't, right? So we're not prompting 100% complete transparency. But does anybody think it's a good idea to go before the legislature and not be ready for the negatives? Right? So our options, the second one said, be ready if it's raised. I'm not going to include negative, but I'm going to be ready if it's raised. Of course, you have to be ready if it's raised. But you also have to be ready to explain why you want more money. And if your argument is, hey, we're reducing recidivism, nobody is reoffending, and one of the legislators raises a hand and says, wait a minute, how long do you track these people? Do you track these people through 12 months or 18 months or 2 years or 3 years? And you say 1 year, well, again, it comes back to how do you frame the negative? Well, we only track them through 1 year. And I will tell you personally, I've sent a whole bunch of drug court graduates to the penitentiary. I really have. And they're considered drug court graduates and success stories because they got past our 1 year. But they did recidivate. Okay, so you have to be ready with that, but you can say, we'd like to track them longer. And if you help us expand, or if you help us get a new computer program, or if you help us get more staff, we would like to track the recidivism further out to see what more we can do for these folks. Because at some level, we let them graduate, we give them this really fancy plaque saying, congratulations, you graduated, and sometimes they're dumped a bit, right? And then we see them back at 6 months or a year, however long. So, but how you package the negative, I think, is hugely important. I sometimes joke that my superhero power is bluntness. I am way more honest than I ever need to be. And I think you got to be with the negative. I think it's only fair. Because if the legislature ends up expanding your drug court program and a year later they find out, well, your recidivism rates are back up, or
guess what? Somebody rats you out and says there's 3,000 arrests and we're only helping 300 people. They care about those things. And the more that we tell them and explain to them, here's why we can only reach out and help 300 people, here's why we need more help and more funds, the more we're transparent, I think the more impressed they are with the program, the more likely they are to support it, as opposed to feeling like, wait a minute, they just pulled the hood over our eyes and tricked us, right? We don't ever want our state funding agencies to think we're tricking or playing fast and loose with the facts. Mm-hmm. Anybody else on how to package the negative?
I would ask, I mean, I think you brought on some very good points about how to package the negative. Are there other risks that you can think of? I can immediately see some risks to that. Maybe, Sean, you can speak to some of this stuff. For example, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Judge Leifman down in Miami Beach. He's in Miami. He is a big advocate of mental health court. But one of the things he says is that the courts that we have now, which are sometimes euphemistically called boutique courts because they handle such a small group of individuals compared to the size of the problem, he says, in fact, the problem is so large that we ought to be reversing it. The adversarial court should be the smaller, more boutique size, and we should be expanding the mental health court and drug court model to almost everyone, to 75% of the criminal docket. One of the risks that even he mentions, and I would ask, is this a risk for the legislature, is at some point your success rate, as you said, is going to start to plummet. You're going to have to start taking in people who are at higher risk of failure, and if you expand your tracking mechanism, you're going to start seeing that. And is there a risk at that point that the legislature is going to say, I think we're throwing good money after bad here, that we've given you much more money, and in fact, we're actually helping percentage-wise fewer people. Is there any other risks to that? Anybody?
Well, I think, there's obviously risk whenever a program maybe doesn't live up to expectations, but also rather than call it a boutique court, I prefer the term problem-solving court because that packages it in a way that is palatable to a lot of legislatures that look, we're fixing something with this. And I think framing a lot of that is the same way. And, we're helping people. And if we're data driven, say, look, we see the numbers coming down, we need more money to go back in and retool to get those numbers back up. So, I mean, again, moving forward, you can continue to phrase that in a way to help make your program work. Say we would love to we know the reasons why this is happening and here's why, because we're facing the tougher cases. But you just sort of have to plan for that and be ready with data. I think if you can do that, anytime you can present the legislature with data, that becomes very helpful.
Okay. Well, and I'm not on mic, so
sure.
Can I grab that one just so the live streamers get this? But here, if I can ask a follow-up.
Sure.
If I'm maybe a cynical county commissioner or a member of the legislature on joint appropriations, when you start tinkering with language and labels, isn't that just spin?
No, it's clarity. I think you're explaining what this court is, because I think boutique carries a negative connotation and it's small, something cute. It's not a broader thing, but when you're properly phrasing it, I think it's the more accurate term to say problem solving than to say boutique. So I think it's a choice, and I guess you could say it's in the eye of the beholder. Certainly from our point of view, that's the proper word for it.
Ultimately, it is the legislator's decision, right? I mean, our legislature gets to decide whether we're going to expand or not based on what they're willing to give for funds. And we have to live with that. And that's not fun. And we're our own third branch of government. And sometimes I think they forget that. And that is frustrating. But in the end, I think our job, and I would compare it to when you're a practicing lawyer, your job is to have full candor to the tribunal. And part of the subpart on that is if you know of adverse authority, you know of a case that's directly on point and kills your case, you are ethically bound as a lawyer to tell the court about that. And I can't tell you how painful that is. The lawyer on the other side missed the case, but I know of the case, and I now have to tell the judge, here's this terrible case that sinks me. I think we have to be full candor to the legislature. I think we have to tell them, here are the pros and cons. Here's our goal. Here's what we think. We in the trenches, we're the people doing this every day. We're the people that know. Please listen to us. Please give us more. Please let us expand. But ultimately, we have to give them the right facts to make the decision, and part of that has to be the negative as well. My 2 cents.
I do. Oh, go ahead, Peter.
Well, I would just say that, as to his context about being sure that you loop in a PIO, I think there is one thing to be said about your ethical obligation to report all sides of that story or potentially negative data. But I think it's important to be cognizant of what that presentation looks like, because if you're not there to provide the narrative, if it's no longer me giving you this presentation or giving this presentation to the legislature, but it's a copy of a slide deck or it's a copy of a report that I'm not there to offer the narrative on, and that's, that subtext, we have to ensure that the document or the statistics are framed in a way that they tell that narrative for us, even if we're not there to do it. Because if it is open to interpretation and it initially reflects negatively and we're not there to carry on that narrative or to make that explanation or spin it and tell you why it's actually a good thing or says why I should have more money to run my program, we have to ensure that anything we're exporting out can help hopefully tell that narrative for us or not be used or manipulated in a way that's going to hurt the programming later on.
That's a great way to put it. Because we're an ethics session, we'll give away gifts. Here's a South Dakota security badge reel. That's an excellent point. The other thing that crosses my mind too is if I'm that cynical legislator or a cautious county commissioner, who has more credibility? I'm spacing your character names, but Courtney or Roger?
I'm Kelly.
Kelly. All right, Kelly. I mean, if I were the legislator and I heard that exchange, I'd want to talk to you. Jack. And so I think there are issues of credibility that arise here long term.
I like the point on controlling the narrative, and maybe all of your presiding judges do this. I'll tell you what our presiding judge does, because I think she's a bit of a genius. Every year she asks for more judges, and most years we don't get them. And now what she does is each year she invites our local legislators to breakfast with the judges. And we have a breakfast, and we explain our budget request, and we show them the numbers, and we explain why statewide we're a different cat, because we are a different cat than the rest of the state of South Dakota. And guess what? Last year, our state UJS said no, and our state legislature said yes. So control the narrative. You can't just send a slideshow off and hope that it's met with, open arms and you're going to get refunded and expanded, et cetera. But try to control that narrative by having the right people in the room answering the right questions, ready to explain, here it is what we actually do every day, and here's why you folks can help us. Think it's a neat idea. It's been awfully good for us.
Looking at the clock, Peter, it seems like we've got to move on.
Okay, I think we're moving on to the third and last scenario. So we've got calling Rick Pierce to the forefront. Here you go.
Oh,
Peter, you got to.
Oh, okay, yeah. We're still beating up on Court Executive Kelly Riker. Kelly is very excited to discuss the work of the employee resource groups with Ed Lomax, who is the head of one of the employee resource groups, the ERGs. They're sometimes called affinity groups. They are internal groups of employees directed to address organizational issues such as the friction between the generations of a multi-generational workforce.
Hi, I'm Ed Lomax. I'm a senior clerk and our ERG leader. I know the court wants us to focus on the generational differences, as you just heard. But frankly, our ERG also believes that there's some fundamental issues that we want to bring to management's attention.
Ed, thank you for meeting with me today. I deeply appreciate your dedication to developing solutions for these multi-generational issues. Your passion is truly inspiring.
Thank you, Ms. Riker. It means a lot to hear that from you. We're just grateful to have the opportunity to voice our concerns.
Ed, please call me Kelly. Do you have a proposal you can share with me today?
Oh, I do. You know, there are some of these petty squabbles between members of different generations, but really what we found that seems to be dramatically different is on things like health benefits and working conditions and compensation.
Okay. I hear you. Those are important concerns, no doubt, but these ERGs are intended to foster belonging amongst generations. Focusing on wages and working condition kind of steers us off track. Could you possibly tell me more about what you mean by better working conditions?
Well, really what the court needs to do is they need to offer free bus passes for those employees who don't drive. And for those who do have a car, maybe free parking. You know, the younger employees take these types of benefits over their health benefits. The health benefits don't seem to matter to them as much. In addition, some of these employees have been working here for over 20 years and feel that they have not been receiving adequate pay for their service. So I think that the court should consider giving pay raises to these dedicated court professionals.
Wow, Ed, you do recognize that our health benefits are some of the best around. Additionally, years worked doesn't necessarily equate to added value to the court. Increasing one's knowledge, skills, and abilities over the year, that's what adds value. Besides, compensation is a huge budget issue. It doesn't even deal with the generational concerns. I was expecting you to focus on things like employee training, inclusive language, and more open communication.
Compensation ties directly to equity. When the court goes to the legislature very soon, the wages should be the top priority, even more so than new judgeships. We employees can assist in providing and testifying from our lived experiences during these hearings. Fighting for fair compensation signals a genuine commitment to these employees.
Ed, I have to tell you, my flabbers are gasted by your response. What happens if we walk away from the legislature empty-handed? We don't either get pay raises or the new judgeships. And those judgeships are critical to the drug court, by the way.
Now, Kelly, we know you won't let that happen. When times are tough, you got the rep of bringing home the bacon.
Yeah, and from now on, you can call me Miss Riker.
Kelly, as you know, I'm the HR director, and I've been standing outside of your office, and I overheard that conversation. Ed does not work in HR, so I think we've got another problem. You set up these employee resource groups for the purposes of getting feedback, getting a better understanding from individuals who know things that we don't know at the executive level. However, they're running around like some type of mini union. We have collective bargaining agreements. We could really get in some trouble with the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board. So I think you need to really be aware of that. And if you don't take it from me, you could ask legal.
Well, Rudy, aren't you just a ray of sunshine today?
Thank you, actors. All right. Peter, do you want this one? Okay. Judge, here, why don't I hand this off then? Time for the next question. And I should say, maybe before we wade into this, we're talking about employee resource groups in this scenario. Some states take a very intentional sort of programmatic approach to those, but for some other states, we've never heard of them. still, like New York, for example, I think we must have New York in the room, and I think you have a publication called Mosaic, and you have like 8 or 10 or 12 employee resource groups by demographic, by ethnicity, by other identities. Does that sound right? And maybe there may or may not be any New Yorkers here, despite where we are. But even if your state doesn't take that sort of programmatic approach, that intentional approach, it still happens kind of naturally. Court reporter associations, probation officer associations, various committees, clerks committees, the judges. I remember, for example, this is a while ago, but the Judges Association in California is very influential. But, understandably, they advocate a judge's perspective, a judge's point of view, sometimes in conflict with state court administration, or at least that's the way it was some years ago. It may not be the current case. My point is that even if we throw around ERGs and the scenario talks about ERGs, even if your state doesn't do that, even if that's not a thing back at home, almost all of us do it in one form or another. It's just some are very programmatic and structured and some are sort of natural. NACM does it with ECPs, dividing by demographics to some degree. So I just want to sort of roll out that introductory note, let anybody think, well, yeah, we don't do ERGs, I'll check out of this discussion. Anyway, so to the questions.
So the question is it legitimate for ERGs to bring up issues beyond what they were designated to look at in their charter? ERGs should limit their work to a well-designated charter. This is what we brought you together for. This is what you ought to be talking to us about. Or B, ERGs should be able to expand based on the issues that are facing the court, even if they weren't originally tasked with looking at these things. So have at it.
Yeah, this one's
a
lot
slight
more
edge
even.
on should be able to expand. Not much, though.
Which of you are from states that use ERGs and call them ERGs? Ooh, okay.
So 20, well,
Yeah, this one.
Are there any?
Again, this is why we do this polling stuff, because it's really fascinating to see what areas we, as a profession, tend to have consensus in, and what other areas we may not have consensus in, like this one.
23 people say that ERGs should limit their work to a well-defined charter. 29 say that ERGs should be able to expand on the current issues. Let me ask before we turn it over to Carl and Judge Sabers, anybody have any more detailed or fundamental questions about employee resource groups, what they do or what they're supposed to be doing? We're all familiar with them or enough that we can vote?
Okay, so folks that are in the group of 30, why do you think they should be able to expand? I mean, the example we gave were real issues for the people working with us, right? They care about parking. They care about how they're treated on a day-to-day basis. They care about what's in their paycheck when they take it home. So those are real issues. Somebody who thinks that should be fair game for an ERG, who wants to speak? No one. Okay.
Oh, snap. So I think my answer is a little caveated because, yes, I think you should be able to expand, but I also think there needs to be knowledge on where it is appropriate to bring those concerns and realistic on how those processes move and the timeline for that. But I think if it's a employee resource group, it should be a group that provides a resource for employees to say what's important to them. And if you're whatever demographic that resource group is for, if it's multi-generational, I think in the example, the real issues that they're facing that might not be as prevalent in other resource groups. So a little bit of a caveat.
You know, what's fascinating to me about the evenness of this response really reflects my own thinking on this. I can't tell you how many times I'll walk through the clerk's office and find somebody rolling around on a chair mat that's breaking up in little pieces, getting caught in their chair wheels. Or I'll walk past a deputy clerk in the clerk's office and he will have worn all the letters off his keyboard, and I'll think, we're not that poverty stricken, buy a keyboard. And then those are just two tiny little sort of mechanical examples. But so often I walk around thinking, somebody tell me your keyboard doesn't work. Somebody tell me you're using a mouse with a piece falling off. I mean, somebody tell me. So I'm not talking about broad feedback necessarily, even like benefits and pay. I'm talking about little stuff. Somebody tell me. So on the one hand, we are dying for feedback. On the other hand, what will the employees tend to say? Compensation that I really can't do much about. Benefits, and we're state employees, so the benefits package applies statewide across every agency, and there's a game fish and parks guy out on the prairie tracking down hunters that have the same benefits that I do, and so good luck trying to change that for one group of employees. And so even if I do get feedback in those areas, I can do very little about it directly. Here's a classic example of the danger or the considerations we have to think through when we're going to group employees by demographic. And it's a few years old now, but I think it's a perfect example of the danger, the potential pitfalls of grouping employees into resource groups or identities. COVID. South Dakota did not shut down, but some of the states did and closed schools. And some of the states, if you were a public employee or a court employee and you had kids, because the schools closed and you had no daycare, you got to work from home. If you were single with no kids, you had to come to court because we have to keep somebody in the courthouse. I mean, to me, that's a classic identity issue or distinction between employee groups that maybe is irresolvable. Maybe you don't want to invite, there's enough tension there already that maybe you don't want to invite more by drawing those distinctions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe I can ask, maybe by a show of hands, who thinks that employee resource groups are potentially an effective way to gain employee feedback, or are there better ways to do it? Show of hands, who thinks that they're okay? Not very many. Who thinks that they are not and that there's a better way to gain employee feedback? Who here doesn't care? So, Roger, you raised your hand. Can you ask why you think they're effective?
Well, being one of the people who helped write the rules, we have a very clear policy and rule on how employee resource groups are formed and how they're managed and how they report to the court administrator on an annual basis to come up with an annual plan. So it's very structured. And they are asked appropriate questions that are appropriate to that demographic. And they're also used as a means if there's going to be some court-wide event or a court-wide training. Sometimes those trainings can be given to those employee resource groups in advance to see if we're missing something. And they provide that feedback that those on the management team may not have. So if your management team is not reflective of the cult culture, it may be really good to have employee resource groups that can come and listen to what your plans are for the year and get some feedback on how you could be more inclusive for the entire court.
Have you noticed any downsides of sort of, I mean, I understand the intention is to improve communication and good communication between employees and more feedback, but have you run into any negative consequences of drawing distinctions?
No, I don't think so. Sometimes the groups can be disheartened, and they don't feel like there's enough for them to do. And I think that can be frustrating sometimes for the groups. But and we also have a new employee resource group that's very interesting, and it's community service. So this takes a whole new angle on employee resource groups, and it allows court employees to come together and support the community to really help show how the court is involved in the community. And that's a different way of looking at an employee resource group other than just a demographic, a group of people in a demographic, but how court employees as their own demographic can go out and help the community.
Boy, that's a great, that is a great distinction to draw, or a purpose, sort of a group purpose to have. Yeah.
I'm coming back over here to what Marissa said, and I really liked it because what she said was, if you're not listening to your employees, then maybe you can't call yourself an employee resource group, right? I mean, you need a new name if you're not listening. And I understand you can't listen to all the issues and lots, like Kelly says, or for the legislature and things we can't do about. I'm going to give a silly example. Years ago, our former presiding judge thought it was time to do something for Valentine's Day for our employees. And the judges ponied up, I think, $6.99 per employee, and we gave everyone a single rose. I just thought it was the weirdest thing in the world, right? Does anyone think that anyone in my building wanted to get a single rose from me? No. I mean, even people who don't like Starbucks, they'd probably rather have $5 on a Starbucks gift card, right? So at some level, we have to listen. And you're right, we can't fix compensation. We can't fix hours. We can't make the public be nicer to us. There are lots of things we can't fix, but I think sometimes the little things are fixable. And if we can listen, sometimes just having their voice be heard is awfully important to the folks. You think of how difficult our lives are. People come into our courtrooms and they dump their troubles. It's a divorce or an abuse and neglect or somebody's going to the pen, whatever it is. We expect our staff to sit and listen, offer no comments, offer no assistance, and take that home every night. And I think what we do is awfully hard every day, and sometimes I think we lose sight of that. Yep, Marissa.
I was just going to add that an explanation will go along. So you might understand where your funding body is and how those presentations go to your legislature, but does your staff understand that that's where the money comes from or the constraints that we operate in? I've only been with courts for 3 years, came from the financial industry, and I couldn't have told you, I obviously failed civics all the way through school because it was a culture shock for me and I just didn't understand it. And does your entry-level clerk at the front counter understand it? Right. What's in your control and what's not.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think that even when they overshoot because they may not understand the context, that's a good opportunity for explanation and education.
Mm-hmm. And it comes back to here where we were talking about controlling the negative narrative also. Like, I'm sorry, we're not in charge of that, but we will go to the legislature and advocate that, or here's why we won't, because there are 29 priorities ahead of you, whatever it may be.
Well, thank you. Why do we do this? It's the integrity of the courts which is at stake right now, probably more than at any other time in my career and in yours too. And it's more than just personnel rules. It's not just right or wrong. All of these questions have been are subtle and they're very, very nuanced. But at the end of the day, it is our job to promote public trust and confidence in the courts.
Peter, Kelly Riker, who has no credibility with their funding sources, wants to make a pitch for the Ethics Committee.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, we've kicked Kelly out. I'm Courtney Whiteside. I am lucky enough to be the chair of the Ethics Subcommittee. Our next meeting is on February 27th at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. So if you have enjoyed your time with these fine folks up here, and we'll leave Kelly out of the meeting, but we would enjoy you coming to join us. We are actually working on Canon 5 of the NACA Model Code of Conduct this month, and we hope to see you all of there. All of you there. Thank you all.
Thank you.